you glorious gamers out there. Welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast, it really helps us out and does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could give us a little review as well, it just helps us out so much. And thank you to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. I know I say this on a weekly basis, but it really does not become any less important. So if you could take those 5 seconds to help us out and give us that review, you would be a total legend in our eyes. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going very well, Mark. Good to be here again. Another long day for me. The work is starting to pile up in the real world, so I am glad to be talking about games instead of something more significant.
That's good. It's been an absolutely miserable day today.
It certainly has.
Let's improve the mood, Lewis, by talking about video games. What have you been playing this week?
Well, Mark, just more Ghost of Tsushima. Basically, I did escape the city for a couple of days and did very little earlier this week, but Ghost of Tsushima has been my kind of nightly thing. I've just been putting in a couple of hours here and there as I've gone along. It's become that... I think I've made my peace with what that game is, and I'm now just approaching it as I'll put a couple of hours in every night, I'll explore a bit, I'll do a mission or two. That's kind of how I'm enjoying it. I think when I first started it, and when I then took a bit of a break from it, if you remember me saying, was because I think I was approaching it in the same way that I approached The Last of Us, which was just kind of like, I have to get stuck in, I have to get through it, I have to do stuff, I have to get to grips with what this game is. And now that I've probably put 10 or 12 hours in it now, I would say. I've reached the point where I'm just like, oh no, I know what this game is. This is a much more chill experience. It doesn't have to be treated like this thing that I'm trying to gun through. I'm just
the hyper-intense Last of Us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't have to be like that at all. So how far are you in it now, Mark? I guess that's what you've been playing this week.
Well, how to quantify this? I reckon I'm about halfway, and that I am about halfway through the second island of 3. And I'm probably 20 plus hours at this point. However, I am doing every single tiny little thing on the map. And ladies and gentlemen, you do not have to play this game like I play this game. You could probably have finished the main campaign by now if you really wanted to with the amount of time that I've probably put in. But I'm probably looking at a 40 plus hour experience. But this game absolutely does not have to be that long if you don't want it to be. I don't imagine you would be taking all that time.
It depends. I mean, I've started to play it more like I was playing Breath of the Wild, which can mean whole days, like whole sessions will go by where I don't do any missions. So I can imagine that by the time I actually get around to polishing off the story, it will be sort of like that. But I'm just not even thinking about it like that. Like if I never do the whole story, which I will, but if I never did, I wouldn't beat myself up about it. It doesn't feel like that's the significant element, you know?
I'm glad that you can have that thought in your head there, Lewis, because I cannot think about the game in that capacity. I very much have to know what's happening with the story. However, I feel like the last 2 weeks, Lewis, we've just kind of gushed a little bit about this game, and there's a lot to gush about, ladies and gentlemen. But I did want to just highlight some of the problems with this game, because it is not a perfect game. It is not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination. And we were just talking a wee bit off air about some of the flaws in the game, and that bloody bird. See that bird, Lewis, that flies onto my screen when I don't want it onto my screen to tell me to go somewhere I'm already going. I hate it. I hate that bird so much. Also, there's sometimes as well that bird, I think it's drunk, because it just flies onto trees and onto walls, and oh man, I just want the natural wind that shows you where to go. You just swipe up on the PlayStation touchpad, and the wind just points you in the general direction of where you want to go. That's all I need, man. Don't need the bird. Let's just leave it. See as well if it's something that I've highlighted on the map. Why is the bird telling me that exists? I know that that's there, so that this bird that swoops on your screen as you're playing the game is supposed to point you towards like places of interest. But if you're already going there, I know that it's there. Yeah. There's no need for you to continue to show me that. So that has become quite annoying. Now, also 20 plus hours into the game, I am finding some of the houses that I go into quite samey.
Oh yeah, definitely.
really quite samey. Now, this is a problem with all open world games. This happens all over the place, but there is quite a lot of scavenging you have to do in this game, and there is also just quite a lot of houses in general, and I feel as though I'm seeing, this is the one where the ladder's here and over there. Oh, this is the bigger one where there's like 2 rooms and then the ladder's over here, and I just know the layout of all the homes. There is a bit of that as well, and possibly the biggest critique that I would have of the game is the enemy AI, when you are in stealth, are nearly blind. Yeah. They simply refuse to see you at moments where you are basically standing right in front of them. Mm-hmm. And even when you are spotted, and the shocking times where you actually are spotted, it is ridiculously easy just to get back into stealth again. Like, you literally just have to move away very slightly and go into some tall grass 6 feet away, and then you're back into stealth again. It is almost ludicrously easy to do that. Thoughts?
On that one, I 100% agree. That was one of the first things that I encountered as being a fairly significant flaw in the game, was that ability to get back into stealth. So I would be in open conflict with a group of enemies, and I would crouch and move, as you say, 2 or 3 steps away, and they would all lose me, and then I would just start assassinating them. And the first time I did that, I thought, this combat is essentially broken in a sense, because it becomes way too easy at that point to take down a large number of enemies. On the other points, like, it's quite interesting. I think that we are playing it in quite a significantly different way, because as I said a little bit about last week, I'm not using the guiding wind at all, and I really actually don't like it very much. I find it kind of obtrusive. And
but you like the bird, and you don't like the wind, and I like the wind, and I don't like the bird.
I like the bird.
But both of these things perform a very similar function. You don't need both.
You absolutely don't need both. And I think that, as you said there, if you've pointed at something yourself on the map, if you've hovered over one of the question marks, for example, and you've put a pin there, I agree. I don't think the bird needs to come there, unless occasionally it's like you're supposed to squeeze through a gap or something. It could help you kind of lead to those things. What I wish that the bird would do is be differentiated, because oftentimes I'll be heading in the vague direction of a mission, say. I quite often just will be heading towards where a mission location is, but I'm quite open to doing a lot of different stuff. But sometimes a bird will drop in and I start following it, and it leads me to the mission, and other times it leads me to a hot spring or, something else, a fox den or whatever. And I kind of wish that there was and maybe there is, and I'm just not noticing it, but more of a visual differentiation between those birds, so that I can quickly go,
no, it's the same. It's exactly yellow birds.
I thought it was, because there's times like that where I'm like, I
them.
don't want to get to that mission. So if you're going to take me to that, then I'm not going to follow you. But if you're taking me to a hot spring, I'll absolutely follow you. And I kind of wish that there was some way for it to sort of suggest which one of those things it is. And similarly on interiors, like, I'm not really scavenging all that much. There is loads of stuff to find. There's supplies. There's,
oh, really?
There's,
oh, man. I go through everything like pathologically.
No, see, I basically refuse to play it that way. That's one of the things that I was doing at the start.
We are playing this really differently.
Yeah, because I just had that feeling at the start that it was a bit more like The Last of Us, or the game I always come back to with that scavenging approach is like Fallout. And I just, that's one of the reasons I don't like Fallout very much, is that you spend
Fallout, you get overburdened.
Yeah.
That's not a problem in
this
game.
That's not a problem here, and that's good. But yeah, I tend to just grab stuff as I find it and not worry too much about what I might be missing. I even deliberately took off the traveler's attire, which vibrates the controller when you're near artifacts.
I wear that all the time.
Because I've found it so annoying. That's one other thing, just very quickly. I think that the controls are not great in this game. I think, as in the control mapping, I think that a lot of the buttons feel counterintuitive.
So your action button, effectively to pick up things in the world or open doors or mount your horse, is R2, which I initially thought was a bit daft, and to be honest with you, did take a bit of getting used to. Now I think that might actually be genius, because it allows you to continually have your thumbs on the sticks and not have to use any of the face buttons to open doors, which would be
that's true.
What you would traditionally use as an action button. So I actually quite like that. Other than that, I don't have any significant problems with the controls.
Yeah, it is particularly the R2 thing, like particularly mounting the horse with that. Things like that feel like they're quite often, triangle in other games, so often I'm pressing
or
that
face
kind of
buttons.
Yeah,
I do understand that. The one thing that I would say is that and you might not actually be at a point where this is too prevalent yet, but when you're selecting different weapons or selecting different stances, that is also R2 and L2.
Yeah.
And then either a direction button or a face button.
Yeah.
Again, that absolutely did take some getting used to. I really think that is quite a good way to select weapons. I really do. Like, I've totally come round on it. I think that I was very much in a position like you, and maybe it is just me getting used to it. I'm 20 hours in, you're less than 10, I would guess.
Well, about 10ish, yeah.
So maybe half as much.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it is just that extra time that I've spent with it now, but man, I'm like flying about, and I very rarely click a wrong button or select the wrong item or do a wrong stance. None of that very rarely happens now.
Yeah.
But it did take some getting used to.
That's good to know, because that is the other main thing for me, is that quite genuinely and literally every time that I have to change either my projectile weapon or the quick throw weapon, I have to stop and pause it and think about or ask what I'm supposed to be doing.
It's either R2 or L2. It's always
but it's like in the
L2.
heat of battle to go like, okay, for this one I want to be holding L2, not R2, or R2 not L2.
Because there's a lot of things that become more instinctive as well.
Yeah.
Like the combat as well. Like the combat, which I absolutely love now, was actually very difficult to get a handle on. But now instead of going in stealthily, because as we were talking about, like, some of the stealth stuff can be a bit crap.
Yeah.
I actually just go in full samurai mode, just take on a whole camp.
Yeah.
Just right away, do a standoff, like you've probably seen in the ads for the game, where you can take several enemies before you even kick off the main fight, and then just get into a sword fight, because that part of the combat is amazing.
Superb, yeah.
And now that I've got used to all the controls, now that I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, and now that I've got all my ghost weapons upgraded and my swords now maxed out, and everything is just all singing, all dancing, it is beautiful.
So have you fully upgraded everything already?
No, I've not fully upgraded
Yeah,
everything, but I've
you're
fully
far along.
upgraded certain things.
I just got my third stance last night, and that I would totally agree with that. The switching between stances is now becoming much more straightforward for me. I can keep that in mind, and I'm using it more. I think that's the thing. I've even been choosing my upgrades based on like how that will force me to change how I'm playing the game. So I deliberately upgraded my bow when I wasn't using it very often, because I wanted to be using it more, and I like being able to approach the game that way. And the thing about the stances particularly does that, where you can be like, I know what I'm supposed to do against this guy, and I'm going to switch things around and approach it in slightly different ways. So the combat, I know we're doing slight negatives here, but the combat is far and away the most fun thing about this game.
Just to end on another couple of positives, I suppose, as well, just to say that all of this, despite being negatives that we were focusing on today, pales in comparison to how awesome this open world is and how good that combat system is. It is 100% worth your time, this game. 100%. I'm still really enjoying all the side content that I'm doing. I'm going through it quite pathologically, but there's kind of main side content, and then there's like minor side content.
Absolutely, yeah.
The main side content stuff is really quite good indeed, actually. And something that doesn't really get mentioned at all when this game is spoken about, or I've not heard it really being spoken about, is the soundtrack to this game is absolutely amazing. Mm-hmm. Absolutely amazing. Obviously, it's all sort of ancient Japanese sounding, but man, it is absolutely bang on point. It is really, really, really good, and it just never gets mentioned.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I've not seen much about that at all, yeah.
But Lewis, it's time for the news. Alright, and news item number 1. Halo Infinite devs 343 Industries have said that they have, quotes, work to do with regards to the visual fidelity of the game. Now, this is of course off the back of the Halo Infinite gameplay from the Xbox Games Showcase that we discussed at length last week, so we won't harp on about that again, but let's say that it was underwhelming in terms of the graphics. So, they have made this statement over on the Halo Waypoint blog.
First, we want to acknowledge that yes, we've heard the feedback coming from parts of the community regarding the visuals in the Halo Infinite campaign demo. While we see and hear far more positive than negative, we do want to share a bit more context. From our perspective, there are two key areas being debated around the community: overall art style and visual fidelity. Based on our learnings from Halo 4, Halo 5 and Halo Wars 2, along with strong community feedback, we decided to shift back towards the legacy aesthetics that defined the original trilogy. With Halo Infinite, we're returning to a more classic art style, which was a key message going back to the very first reveal that garnered enthusiastic and positive responses. This translates to a more vibrant palette, cleaner models, and objects with less noise, though it doesn't mean less detail. While we appreciate this may not be everyone's personal preference, we stand by this decision and are happy to see it resonating with so many fans around the world. The second theme being discussed involves visual fidelity. Negative feedback in this area includes comments around characters and objects appearing flat, simplistic, and plastic-like, lighting feeling dull and flat, and object pop-in. We've read your comments, we've seen the homemade examples of retouch content, and yes, we've heard the Digital Foundry assessments. In many ways, we are in agreement here. We do have work to do to address some of these areas and raise the level of fidelity and overall presentation for the final game. The build used to run the campaign demo was work in progress from several weeks ago, with a variety of graphical elements and game systems still being finished and polished. While some of the feedback was expected and speaks to areas already in progress, other aspects of the feedback have brought new opportunities and considerations to light that the team is taking very seriously and working to assess. We don't have firm answers or outcomes to share yet, but the team is working as quickly as possible on plans to address some of the feedback around detail, clarity, and overall fidelity. The team is committed and focused on making sure we have a beautiful world for players to explore when we launch.
Long one there, Lewis. Thank you very much for that. First of all, it's got to be said, admirable for 343 to come out and say this. They've not dodged the question. They've addressed it head on, and fair play to them. Absolutely fair play to them. However, honestly, it seems to me that, and maybe it's because of COVID, or maybe there's other factors at play here, but it seems to me very much as though this game needs 6 more months. 6 more months that they don't have, because they have to meet the Series X launch, because Xbox have promised that Halo Infinite will be there when the Series X launch, and they cannot go back on that. That is simply not an option. So when they're talking about things like, oh, this was a work in progress build, this is similar to the Aaron Greenberg comments that came out shortly after the showcase, where I don't think that is a very good thing to be saying, because that is implying that from that demo to when the game launches, the game will be noticeably significantly better. And I don't think that it will be. Maybe it will be at some point down the line, and maybe they can do some sort of major graphics overhaul down the line. But between that demo and by the time this game launches, which again, as we were discussing last week, less than 4 months now, that's not going to happen. It's just not. It's absolutely not going to happen. As well, it makes me think about what they're saying there again. So in terms of art style versus fidelity, which is, we discussed a little bit last week as well, it makes me wonder whether or not that art style with less noise but somehow still the same amount of detail, which I think that's a bit of a debatable sentence as well, but it makes me wonder how much that art style was a choice and how much that art style is a necessity to get this game out on time.
Interesting, yeah. So you're suggesting there that they have maybe been forced to go down that route because they're running out of time to make it look the way they might have wanted it to?
I think that we might be looking at a game that is initially, at least, maybe not as good as the devs want it to be when it comes out, and that is because they have to meet
yeah, it's
the Xbox Series X.
It's undelayable. It's like
it absolutely cannot be delayed. Yeah, I totally agree. It is undelayable. So I'm not sure that art style was all that much of a choice and was actually a necessity. Whether it was chosen way back when or whether it was chosen relatively recently to hit that deadline.
Yeah.
That's entirely speculation,
speculation.
Of course, but
and
to me that makes a lot of sense.
I think that what they're saying and what a lot of fans have been saying about that kind of return to the original trilogy, and those are the games that most Halo fans really hold dear.
Of course.
So I kind of believe that to an extent. I think that there's probably been a decision somewhere to be like, let's go back towards something closer to what that looks like. Now, I don't really know a great deal about the difference between the original trilogy and the latter games and how the visuals are so different to roll backwards. But taking them at face value, I can see that that's the case. There's still problems there, though, that like things within that statement. This translates to a more vibrant palette, cleaner models, and objects with less noise. Those models to me were not vibrant, and they were not particularly clean. They were dark and muddy and flat. And
which is exactly what they said.
Yeah,
and I said last week that they look plasticate, which is exactly
what
the
they
words
said.
that they used. Yeah.
I'm totally willing to accept that there's a choice around art style going on here, but I still don't think it's a well executed version of that art style, because you could still have those plasticky, high contrast colors kind of models within the game. Absolutely have that. Make that green
and make it look good.
Yeah, just make everything a bit slicker looking and a bit cleaner and a bit nicer. I mean, we talked about this already, but art styles can, particularly for people like us, like a lot of the games that we've played in the last couple of years stand out because of their art style. You pick up a lot of indie games in particular because of their art style.
Yeah,
if this was an indie game, you would not be.
Eyes,
yeah, like this isn't it though. This isn't a style that you go like, that's really interesting, I'll check that out. It just looks like an old game.
Yeah, exactly, Lewis. So to me, the Halo art style has always been realism in that universe. Now, don't get me wrong, there is definitely artistic choices being made about how things look, about how Master Chief looks, about how the spaceships look, about how the enemy aliens look, how all of these things look. Of course, there's artistic choices in there, but it's always realism within that universe. And to me, really, that art style hasn't really changed. I mean, if we are calling that an art style, it hasn't really changed from the beginning of Halo. It's got better. Mm-hmm. It's still been realism within the Halo universe, which has got better and better and better and better and better through the years. But for me, it feels a lot like if Call of Duty came out and said, oh, we're going back to the art style that we had in Modern Warfare 2, and their art style, again, is just realism. Mm. That is realism in the real world, in war. And for them to go back and say, oh, we're just going back to the Modern Warfare 2 or how that looked, then that would just be a less good version of their current art style.
Yeah, exactly. It feels to me as well like, should this game look considerably worse than the recent Doom games? Not really. Like,
no, of course
obviously
not.
it's a big open world in the way that those Doom games aren't, but the individual character models, particularly when you're showing it off in a demo.
It's Halo.
Yeah, exactly.
It's one of the biggest gaming franchises in the world. Well, why does it look like that?
It's certainly Microsoft's biggest franchise. They need it to really get across to people. They need to capture attention with it. And I think particularly if you're going to show off 8 minutes, you make that 8 minutes look as good as those Doom games did, for example. And they don't have a super realistic art style, right? They have an art style that is not far off what Halo's doing. Obviously, it's much more kind of demons than it is alien monsters.
Absolutely,
but the models should be pretty similar.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous sort of looking game, but again, with a footing in realism in that universe.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I think we can argue back and forth about fidelity and art styles all day, but bottom line, that game didn't look good in those 8 minutes.
Exactly, yeah.
That didn't look good in those 8 minutes. And I genuinely hope, really hand on my heart I do, hope that game looks a hell of a lot better at launch, because I think a lot of people buying a Series X to play that Halo, if it comes out looking like that, a lot of people are going to be disappointed. Alright, and news item number 2. Sticking with Halo, Lewis, it has been announced now that the Halo multiplayer will be free to play. Now, this was originally leaked by Smith's Toy Store, believe it or not, in a now deleted post on their website. However, Xbox were on it almost immediately and have confirmed that the Halo multiplayer will be free to play and will support 120 FPS on the Xbox Series X, which is very good indeed. I like to hear that. My initial thoughts on this, Lewis, were that, oh, well, this is going to hurt the game sales, because there might be people out there might be quite a lot of people out there who are only interested in Halo for the multiplayer that don't really care about the story particularly and really only want Halo for that kind of classic Halo multiplayer, you know? However, you actually brought up a fantastic point about this, in that most people who own an Xbox Series X are going to have it bundled with Halo, and those that don't will almost certainly be on Games Pass, which is giving you Halo as part of your Games Pass subscription anyway. Yeah. So the vast majority of people that own a Series X, to all intents and purposes, will have Halo anyway, you would have thought.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at this now, so if you are, say you've got a Series X not bundled with anything, but suddenly you're sitting here with the option of an entirely free multiplayer game, plus you could pay whatever it is, $15 or whatever, to get Game Pass and get the campaign, or you could pay $60 and get the campaign, you know, so it's absolutely going to be driving people towards Game Pass. What Xbox are doing right now is fundamentally changing what game sales mean or what any of that looks like. They don't actually need Halo to sell, 4 million copies over its opening weekend, whatever. The way that we currently, look at the way we've been talking about recent PlayStation games, we've covered news stories about
Ghost of Tsushima, how quickly it sold, absolutely.
Yeah, and so, but they're just not interested in that, because at the moment, actually, in some ways, the least smart way of getting Halo is to buy the game in a box from a shop.
That's a really interesting way of putting it. The least smart way to get Halo is to buy it from a shop.
It's like they're making it so close to being unreasonable to pay for it that you would just be so stupid not to just get Game Pass and get everything. You're getting the free multiplayer, then you're getting the campaign through Game Pass, and for that same amount of money, you're getting all these other
library
games.
Of hundreds and hundreds of games.
And so that's what they're doing, and it's really fascinating.
It genuinely is. Like, it really is very fascinating indeed, because this is yet another move that is just pushing people towards Game Pass again. But also, I find it quite interesting that if PlayStation were in a similar position, and PlayStation very much focused on single-player games, they don't really have a multiplayers in the sense of Halo Infinite, or certainly not anything of that caliber. If PlayStation were in that position, though, I don't think that they could make this move. So this is an entirely Games Pass-driven move, as far as I'm concerned, which is very, very interesting indeed. Also, just on the multiplayer as well, 343 have confirmed that the online multiplayer will have microtransactions. However, it will not have real money loot boxes, which is a good thing. And although this is not confirmed yet, there is extremely strong speculation and rumour that there will be a season pass, which, let's be honest, you would be expecting, wouldn't you? And 343 have confirmed that there will be co-op split screen for the campaign and 4-way split screen for online multiplayer, local, that is, which is great. I very much want to see a return of the couch co-op now that we have powerful, all fancy-dancy consoles. That's definitely what I want to see. But I think that's really fascinating, the way Xbox are so uninterested now, it seems, in people actually buying their games. It is all about getting as many people as possible on Games Pass.
Yeah. And in that way, Halo is the perfect launch title for them, because, like you say, you and all your friends get an Xbox Series X, you can all play this multiplayer for free. Amazing that they're doing couch co-op and...
Oh yeah, super great, yeah.
All of that
amazing,
stuff. Like, it's easy because of the kind of conversation we've been having around the graphics to be negative about it, but this is still going to be a solid game. They're making really interesting moves. It'll be great to see how the fan base all responds to that when the console does drop eventually. Yeah,
I have to say that we're not saying that Halo's going to be a bad game.
Yeah.
Neither of us are saying that. All we're saying is that it doesn't look very next gen at all. In fact, some would argue it doesn't even look current gen. Sorry, that was rude. Alright, news item number 3. PlayStation now, Lewis, have confirmed that while the DualShock 4 controller will be compatible with the PlayStation 5, you won't be able to use that DualShock 4 controller to play any PlayStation 5 games. So in my mind, that has basically rendered the fact that it is compatible with the PlayStation 5 Totally pointless. Totally pointless. So PlayStation have said that they believe PlayStation 5 games should take advantage of the new capabilities and features we're bringing to the new platform, and this includes the features of the DualSense wireless controller. Now, the DualSense wireless controller is definitely doing some very, very interesting things in terms of feedback, particularly the haptics, all very, very interesting, and kind of a step above what Xbox are doing with their current controller. To all intents and purposes, the new Xbox controller is basically the same as the old Xbox controller, whereas PlayStation seem to be trying a bunch of additional stuff here. Now, PlayStation have tried stuff with their controllers in the past, and it has failed drastically, so I am not trying to say that this is in any way, quotes, better. I'm just saying that they are trying different things, whereas Xbox are very much sticking to the tried and true controller setup. However, in terms of input between the DualSense and the DualShock 4, it has the same button arrangement, it has all the same buttons. I don't understand why in terms of input that would be any different. So it would only be the outputs from the controller, the haptics, the rumble, whatever, that would change in the DualSense. I therefore find it incredibly difficult to believe that there wasn't some workaround where I couldn't play the new Horizon on a PlayStation 4 controller. I find that very, very difficult to believe indeed.
I agree with that. Yeah, it's hard to imagine, like you say, given that they're effectively the same piece of kit in some ways, not in all ways, obviously, but
the inputs are the same.
The basics of it are the same, and so it's disappointing. It's not massively surprising, but it is disappointing.
I would agree with that. It's not the biggest thing in the world. It's not the end of the world, certainly. The way that I put it on our social media is it would have been nice not to have to buy a second DualSense immediately after spending what I'm sure will be quite a lot of money on the console. Mm-hmm. So that would have been maybe a nice thing for people that were looking to get two controllers. But it does show as well that PlayStation are doubling down on this generational break, whereas Xbox are not, because they were very, very quick on Twitter to point out that all Xbox One controllers, including their adaptive controller, which helps a lot with accessibility, that they will all be compatible with the Xbox Series X. There won't be a single Xbox One controller, official Xbox One controller, that you wouldn't be able to use on the Xbox Series X, which they pointed out hours later.
And quite right too. Like,
absolutely quite right.
It's another typically kind of consumer-minded thing from Xbox, that. But at the same time, PlayStation have always done this big doubling down on the generational shifts. Like, that has always been part of PlayStation strategy. Not always to the exclusion of all other peripherals or whatever. I noticed on our socials as well that you pointed out that between the PS1 and the PS2, controllers were backward compatible.
I also pointed out that was 20 years ago.
Exactly that. Since then, I think we get very caught up in all these discussions about generational changes and who's doing what, but PlayStation basically, other than a stumble on PS3, which they did recover by the end of that generation, they've always got the most gamers. They've always brought people along with them. And gamers on the Xbox side will be absolutely delighted that they can use their stuff from the previous generations. Of course they will be. But ultimately, the new things that the PlayStation 5 might be able to offer are probably the things that people are going to get excited about.
This is correct. I think that if the fact that your PlayStation 4 controller isn't going to work on your PlayStation 5 is the deal breaker for you, you probably weren't going to buy a PlayStation 5 in the first place. Yeah. That's kind of how I feel about it. However, it is just another showing from PlayStation that they are truly believing in this generational break, and that yes, you can connect your PlayStation 4 controller to our new console, but we don't want you to use that, and we will only let you use that on games that it was designed to be used on.
Yeah.
And again, this sort of shows PlayStation on the tried and true path here in terms of the wider console and marketing, whereas Xbox have just given away their flagship games multiplayer for free. Do you know what I mean? It's two completely different worlds. PlayStation very much sticking with the traditional marketing and how consoles have been sold for a long time, and Xbox just doing things differently.
Yeah, trying things, yeah.
I still wonder a lot about how Xbox is all going to come together. I really do, but I mean, they've got a lot of smart people looking at it, a lot of smarter people than me looking at it, so I'm willing to be proved wrong here, Liz, definitely.
It would just be so interesting to compare the two. Not necessarily a comparison of who won, but just
because I really think that if we're determining the next generation on units sold, we're already on the wrong foot.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to be
I think it's really going to be PlayStation 5 sold versus Games Pass subscriptions.
Yeah. But also
I really think that is the war that we're currently having, quotes.
And I think both companies are going to be looking at things more like depth of engagement and time spent in ecosystems and all that kind of thing, a lot more than just the purest numbers that we're used to talking about. So just to think about what each console begins to represent for different gamers when they do drop, it's going to be fascinating.
Absolutely agree. Alright, news item number 4. Spider-Man is coming to Marvel's The Avengers list, but it's going to be a PlayStation exclusive character, and a lot of people are not happy about that. A lot of people are not happy about that. Honestly, I don't mind exclusives, Lewis. I don't mind exclusives at all. If PlayStation or Xbox or Nintendo or whoever want to develop a game or pay someone to develop a game exclusively for their platform, fine. I really have no problem with that at all. However, exclusive major DLC for a multi-platform game that fundamentally changes how that game is played, like categorically changes how that game plays, feels dirty. I just don't like it. I am struggling to articulate why I don't like that, or why that is so much worse than a normal exclusive, because the game is on other platforms, so perhaps it just feels a bit like gatekeeping at that point. But I don't like it, mate. I don't like it. This to me is exclusivity at its worst.
I'm struggling to get a foothold in this debate. I've seen that people are really angry about it, and I'm
not angry about it. Obviously, I'm on the right side of the fence here, but I can understand, like I genuinely can, on a multi-platform game, that if you pay your $60 here and buy it on an Xbox or Steam or wherever, or you spend your $60 here on PlayStation, that $60 is suddenly worth more. And I don't like that for something that's being advertised as the same game.
Yeah.
I just don't like it. I don't think anybody's doing anything, quotes, anti-consumer or anything like that necessarily. But it just doesn't sit well.
I'll totally take that point. Yeah, the value changes there. Although that is to assume that there is no Xbox exclusive content coming, which we don't know yet. I don't know that there would be. There's the very obvious and quite convoluted connections between Sony and the Spider-Man character.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. There is a very complicated relationship between Sony and Spider-Man and Marvel.
Across like various media, but most obviously because Spider-Man PS4's game, that surely makes it a bit more likely that was going to happen that way. But, if Xbox came out next week and said they've got the Doctor Strange exclusive DLC...
It's not Spider-Man though.
It's not, well, that's where it comes in, right? So as part of...
It'd be different if they had like Thor,
but therein lies the thing, right? I suspect that some of the anger here is specifically that it's Spider-Man. It's not what you were saying there, that it's just...
To be fair, my point isn't to do with it being Spider-Man.
I know that's not your... I know it's not your point, but I think that there's a subtext there, which is if PlayStation had announced that they had exclusive DLC character and it was Doctor Strange, or it was, Black Panther or something, although that might have got a different reaction as well, but I think that it's because it's Spider-Man that people are getting motivated about this, because people love Spider-Man, and that's fair enough.
Love Spider-Man.
But that is also just business, and that's how the gaming business works. And we've seen exclusive characters. What was it, Soul Calibur, that used to have like Darth Vader in one version and Yoda in the other, stuff like, none of this is new particularly. I think the point you made
also, well, that wasn't online focused either, so there's an online component to this as well. So for a game that's primarily online focused, coming out in 2020, which is cross-gen and cross-gen progression, not being cross-play, I thought was a bit odd when they announced that, or when that was known. But I never really thought much of it. And then this has happened. And now I'm thinking, oh, was that why? Because you can't have Spider-Man on the Xbox. Is that why? Is that why the game doesn't have crossplay? Because that's fucking bullshit.
Maybe. And
that is anti-consumer.
Yeah, and that's not ideal. And although you would imagine through some wizardry you could just have PlayStation only lobbies for people that are using Spider-Man or something. You could set up your servers that way. I assume that's quite a lot of work, but yeah. Yeah, but if PlayStation are going to pay you a lot of money for it, then you think you would go for it. This is the thing, I don't have any strong feelings about this still. I totally see why people would be annoyed about it. I also think it's absolutely nothing new at all. I'm not remotely surprised that Spider-Man is in this position given the deal between Sony and Marvel.
It's not necessarily that deal. Obviously there's a relationship there between Marvel and Spider-Man and PlayStation, but for me, really, I really strongly feel is that either he should have been in the game completely for all players, or he should just not have been in the game. That is, I think, what you should have done. You should have done one of those two things, not this in the middle bit, where, again, it does feel very gatekeepy. And even as a PlayStation fanboy, even as a totally admitted Sony pony, that doesn't sit well with me. I don't like that at all, to be honest. I really, really don't. PlayStation have also announced that they will have 30 days timed exclusive on certain cosmetic items as well, including legendary outfits, legendary emotes, epic takedowns, and nameplates, whatever some of those things are. But it's just another little bit of exclusivity that they're having with PlayStation now, and it seems as though there's obviously a relationship here between Square Enix and PlayStation and Crystal Dynamics, and it's also been announced that PlayStation will have the first opportunity to play the beta as well on August the 7th and 8th, and the open beta will be in the 14th to the 16th and the 21st to the 23rd of August as well, which is actually quite good for this game specifically, which, let's face it, never got off to a great start, although it does seem to be winning back some fans recently. But it's good that they're having a lot of open betas prior to the launch, because a games as a service launch is notoriously bad online, and I really don't think that this game can afford it.
No, exactly. And it gives people some hands-on time and to see if they're going to be into it
as well. Hopefully generate those good stories, you know. All right, and finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout out number 1, first podcast of the month, and that means free games, Lewis. Free games, we love free games. And on your PlayStation Plus this month, you get Fall Guys and the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 campaign remake. Oof, hell of a title, that one. And on your Xbox games with Gold, you get Portal Knight, Override Mech City Brawl, and then on your Xbox One games, you get MX Unleashed and Red Faction 2. I really don't know why Xbox are still doing these games with Gold. They've clearly given up.
I don't think you need to worry about it too much longer.
A superb service in Games Pass. I really don't. But Lewis, shout out number 2, Fall Guys, which I just mentioned is coming to PlayStation Plus. It came out today. It actually came out today and is available on PlayStation Plus today. So this, I believe, marks the first time that a game has launched straight into PlayStation Plus. So Mediatonic, who are the creators of Fall Guys, have not been shy about saying that Rocket League has been their inspiration for this decision, which obviously had a massively successful launch on PlayStation Plus. However, it didn't launch straight into PlayStation Plus. I think it was a few weeks later, maybe a few months later. But also, apparently, it had been suggested to them by PlayStation, quotes, almost instantly, that they release on PlayStation Plus as well as part of the marketing for this game. And I don't know if you remember, Shuhei Yoshida was also on several things over the summer promoting Fall Guys. For those of you that don't know, Fall Guys is a 60-player online knockout game which sees you compete in tasks sort of like a game show. Our very own Lewis Camley compared it to a video game version of Takeshi's Castle.
It looks so much
with
like that.
Little funny blob people. Honestly, it looks great. It's completely taken Twitch by storm.
Totally, yeah.
Over the beta, it was the highest viewed game on Twitch, and as of right now, before we recorded this podcast, it was also the highest viewed game on Twitch. This, of course, being launch day, maybe you would expect that. And very similarly to Rocket League, it had a very, very strong showing in its beta, and then very quickly went into the PlayStation Plus. And the reason for that is that both of these are relatively small indie games that require a big online audience to function correctly. So actually, I think this is a really clever move by PlayStation and Fall Guys to get people on that platform and seemingly to enjoy a really fun game by all accounts. Everyone seems to be raving about it.
Absolutely, yeah. The noise around it today has been amazing. I think you were saying there's no official kind of reviews yet because it has.
No, there's not. It's literally just out, so there's no reviews.
But if you look on like gaming Twitter just now, a lot of people are having a lot of fun with it. A few of my friends have been playing it already. There's been some server issues, but that's to be expected on a launch day for what has turned out to be a really popular game. I think you said it right there. Like Mediatonic in particular have nailed the promotion around this game.
Totally, man.
You know, they played Twitch well to get it right at the top of that list. They've got the deal with PlayStation in place there to get it in front of the biggest install base on console. It's doing everything that it needs to do to be a success. Hopefully it has legs. That's the main thing with these
Absolutely,
types of
man.
games, you know?
Hopefully it stays there, and hopefully they generate enough money to make it all worth it. Alright, shout out number 3. The Analog Pocket has come out this week, Lewis, and has sold out almost immediately, almost instantaneously. For those of you that aren't retro gamers, the Analog Pocket is basically a Game Boy. It's like a third-party Game Boy, basically. And it was built to support the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advanced, and it also has adapters for Game Gear, Neo Geo, and Atari Lynx. So the idea is that this piece of hardware would play actual cartridges from the Game Boy. And it also comes with a 1600 by 1440 display screen, which is ridiculously high resolution for Game Boy games and games that are that old. And also, unlike other pieces of hardware that you might have seen that play old Game Boy games and whatever, this doesn't rely on emulation and instead reproduces the system at a hardware level due to some fancy-dancy chip array that is well beyond my comprehension. So far as I'm concerned, that might as well be magic, but for retro gamers, that is a big deal, not having the emulation there and actually having the games be produced as they were back in the day, effectively. Visually, I actually think the thing looks really cool. It looks as if a Game Boy was designed by Apple, which I'm properly into. It looks really good. It is £200 or $200, should I say, if you can get your hands on one, which right now you cannot. But particularly if you are a retro gamer who's into their handhelds, this very much seems to be the one to get. This is the absolute daddy, so go and check it out. Alright, and final shout out number 4. xCloud is coming to Games Pass Ultimate on September the 15th. It will be coming with 100 games that can be streamed via xCloud on Android phones and tablets. Games Pass Ultimate subscribers will have access to all their friends lists, all their achievements, all their controller settings, all their saved progress via the Xbox Games app. So basically what you would be hoping for and what you would be expecting. It also supports Xbox One controllers. It supports PS4 controllers, which is very interesting considering the PlayStation 5 doesn't support PlayStation 4 controllers, but xCloud does. And also they have announced the launch of the Razer Kishi, I think is how we're saying that, which makes your phone into a sort of Switch-looking device.
Yeah, it's like a wraparound.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It looks absolutely great, and I really, really like that. And just to rhyme off some of the games that are going to be coming to this. So Forza 4, your Gears of War 4, Gears 5, Grounded, all the Halos, Master Chief Collection, Halo Wars 2, Halo Wars 1, Halo 5, Hellblade's also coming, both Ori games are coming, Quantum Break's coming, State of Decay 2 is coming, State of Decay 1's coming, all the Wastelander games are coming. It's all going to be there. It's all going to be there. A lot of the stuff that you'd want to play is going to be there. And for this all to be rolled into the Games Pass Ultimate subscription is fabulous. It really is absolutely tremendously good. I don't really know what to say apart from that.
There's nothing more to say about it. It's some offer. It's a list of incredible games, most of which I've got to admit I wouldn't want to play on a phone, but it's amazing that it can be done.
Or it'd be good on that Switch thing. That'd be awesome.
Maybe.
Making the phone into a Switch, that'd be great.
But just the phones are smaller than Switches, and the Switch screen is small enough already to pack in that much detail. But I'm nitpicking. I'm not really having a go at that at all. I just mean there's a lot there, which is great, but it's still mainly, I think, going to be used on laptops and stuff like that. The power of xCloud to cut out the download times is, to me, still the most exciting part of that.
Yeah, man. I mean, definitely, it's definitely a big part of it for a lot of people. The sooner it comes to my TV, the better, quite frankly. All right, Lewis, I think it's time for a beer, and then we'll be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back with Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is our play-along of Bastion, Lewis. Now, for those of you that don't know, Bastion is an isometric action RPG by Supergiant Games. The game was originally released on Xbox Live Arcade back in July 2011. Supergiant was started by two ex-EA employees, Amir Raho and Gavin Simon, back in 2009, and Bastion was their first game and was actually made by a team of only 7 people. And if you have played along with us, I think that's truly remarkable that game was accomplishable by 7 people in 2 years. That is absolutely incredible. Just to give you a sort of wee overview of the story, you play as the kid and you wake up after the world has ended due to an event called the Calamity. The Calamity has ripped your home city of Colondia apart into floating pieces in the sky and reduced most of the population to ash. You initially travel to the Bastion, which is where you're supposed to go in times of trouble, where you meet Rux, who is the game's narrator. Now, Liz, I think that's the first key point of this game is the narration. So, we played very recently 2 games that also had narrators, Thomas Was Alone and Volume.
Oh, yeah.
And you didn't like either of them.
No, I like the games. I didn't love the narration, yeah.
What did you think of this one?
I think the narration here is really strong. It's part of the game's overall style, including its visuals, its music, all of those things brought together. It's doing some really interesting and quite different things with a lot of those, but the narration in particular ties it all together. It also stands out in an interesting way because it's quite unusual, I think, in how they approach telling the story. So in effect, and correct me if you think of this slightly differently, but basically it feels like it's eventually revealed what the narrator's doing, but the narrator is kind of telling you your actions slightly after you've done them all the time, and so it's essentially telling your story back to you
as it happens. Yeah, that's right. So Logan Cunningham, I believe, is the guy's name who does the narration. The way that he portrays the voice is very kind of old westy sounding,
exactly,
but it almost feels as if you're being read a fairy tale as it happens. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
A fairy tale, but also it's got elements of like noir storytelling as well. It's got that kind of aesthetic.
I never even thought of that, but that is absolutely bang on. It really does have that kind of noir narrator to it as well. It really, really does. They've got a very, very gruff voice. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. But also as well, like, it's used to poke fun at the player as well. It's used to kind of break the fourth wall a little bit sometimes. And it's like quite genuinely funny.
Absolutely, yeah.
which I did like. And in comparison to Thomas Was Alone, say, which had a narrator that basically just told you the story of what was happening as it was happening as well, but this was much, much more dynamic in what you were doing. And for example, when you first get a weapon, which is almost immediately, and you start bashing boxes all over the place, the narrator just says, and the kid just let himself go crazy for a while or something like that as you're battering all these boxes for no reason. And if you keep on falling off the edge of the map, which we'll come on to, and is something that happened, or something that happened to me pretty bloody frequently, again, he'll just poke fun at him and say, "Oh yeah, this kid can't put one foot in front of the other," or something like that. You know, been quite a funny, quite a funny way. It's the narration. Actually, I thought one was performed brilliantly. I thought. And really lended itself to the game very well, and was actually a very clever move, because probably it was actually a very cheap way of telling quite a good story very well.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Because there's not a lot of other storytelling mechanics within the game. There's not.
No,
like
there's not. No, the only
or
storytelling mechanic is basically the narrator.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they had to nail it, and fair play to them. They fucking did.
They did. And one thing on top of that as well is that the narration is used sparingly, and all of the kind of in-game dialogue. So you can often speak to different characters about items you find around the different levels, and those bits of dialogue, those bits of story are usually delivered in like a sentence to 2 sentences. It's usually like 3 lines of subtitles on screen, and that is it. And that to me is quite refreshing, because a game like this could have easily slapped it on thick with all the lore, and you're in this
getting
fantasy
exposition
world.
for days.
Exactly, and this place blew up, and this guy's involved, and there's these people, and in reality there is quite a lot going on in the game world, but
again,
it
it's
only
a very
tells
good
you what
example.
it needs to tell
it's
you.
a very good example for me of show don't tell.
Exactly, yeah.
Which in terms of writing is a very good thing to be doing. But just moving gears slightly, just touching on that art style, which must be the first thing that hits you when you see the game. So striking, beautiful, quite frankly. Hand painted, not even hand drawn, hand painted apparently. Very vibrant, and just looks absolutely stunning. And the way that the levels in the game build as you move through them. So if you're walking along a path, you can see maybe 3 steps in front of yourself most of the time, and then the path is just building itself as you move along, and or when you come to sort of arenas for fighting or whatever, like that'll build all at the one time and things like that. But I, looking at videos of the game and kind of knowing how the game played, was a bit skeptical about how that would feel when I actually started playing the game. Man, it was great. Man, it worked. It super fucking worked. Like, I don't really know why, but I think that looking at a video of that game, you could think, I'm not sure about that. Actually nailed it.
Yeah, I'm going to pick you up right on that, because this is one of the first games that we've done as one of these play-alongs that I haven't really had much to do with beforehand. I hadn't ever really looked at this game much. I wasn't particularly dying to play it in the way that I have been with certain other games that we've done.
No, yeah, I must admit, this one was totally driven by me.
And that's absolutely fine. But I've got to say, like, having looked at like stills of it and looked at little videos of it, I was kind of like, this isn't going to do anything for me. And that's partly why I didn't really get around to it until quite late in the month. Obviously, other things like other games being out did that as well. But the art style, which, as I said before, like, there's a hell of a lot going on here. There's a lot of different styles and tones. It's partly westerns, partly noirish. It looks like a beautiful hand-painted, colourful cartoon. Somehow, together, all of that stuff works, and it really shouldn't. I think in less experienced or less talented hands, it really would have fallen apart. But something about all of that, the look, the sound, the narration, the storytelling, it all comes together. And that thing, particularly about the way that the world comes up to meet you, is where all of that style stuff and the story stuff around the calamity and the explosion comes together with how the game plays, because that stuff leads you through the world and you never get lost, and you always know where you can explore to get extra items and where you're actually supposed to be going. Because of that mechanic, it works so well. It's
absolutely brilliant. Yeah, and you mentioned the style there, and this game has style for days, and there's a lot of games like that, but it's style over substance a lot of the time. Absolutely not the case here. The gameplay is so fucking tight. It is absolutely perfect. The game is exactly what it's trying to be. It is incredibly tight in terms of gameplay. It is a perfectly distilled version of an action RPG, and I don't mean that in that it's like bare bones. Like, I mean, it's distilled like a fucking fine Scotch whiskey, Lewis. It's an absolutely beautiful thing. It is like the truest version of itself. It's an incredible thing to play, actually, and just think that everything here is all singing off the same hymn sheet. Everything is harmonising perfectly, and it's all tied together with what is actually pretty simple gameplay, but with an incredible variety, but done again very simply, like presented to the player in very simple terms. Like, so for example, you can always carry 2 weapons and like a secret skill, which is like a special move, effectively. So there's 11 weapons, which is already quite a lot, but then there's 10 upgrades for each of those weapons. There are 20 buffs as well for experience that you get through the game, and you can equip up to 10 of them if you play through and get more levels up. I think I got to like level 5 or 6 or something like that. Yeah. So I got to equip 5 of them. But then your secret skills as well, there are 2 of them per weapon, plus 8 that aren't tied to weapons, so there's 30 of them. And then on top of that, you get shrines, which are things that you can add adds to the game. For example, you can make the enemies more difficult.
Yeah, they're debuffs basically.
Debuffs, yeah, I absolutely, yeah. Which make the game more difficult but grant you more experience points or whatever, or help you in other ways. And that within an incredibly easy system of like you have one attack that is a sword and one attack that is a bow, say, has such variety. It has incredible range. It is unbelievable. I'd be willing to bet that we basically didn't use the same weapons, to be honest with you.
I'm kind of smirking here because something that you just said makes me think that possibly we did. But
what weapons did we use?
So most of the time I used the war machete and the bow until the latter stages of the game.
I used the war machete, but I used the musket. Was my secondary weapon.
I really liked that pairing because essentially I kind of want to dive into loads of stuff you said there because I think this is the core of it all. But
this is, by the way, the gameplay. Like we're talking about style, we're talking about the story, and the story is like a fine video gamey story, but that is not what makes this game special.
Absolutely not.
It's just how all these things perfectly come together. Like, and I use the term tight. Basically, what I mean by that is that there's no waste.
Yeah,
there's nothing is superfluous.
There's no fat in this
There's
game.
no. It's exactly what it has to be. And every point of it is done brilliantly. It wastes no one's time. They never wasted their time and they're not wasting ours. And it's just exactly what it should have been.
Absolutely.
It's incredible to think that about a game. Do you know what I mean?
Particularly, yeah, like you said, one made by only a few people. It's their first game together. Like, you would expect way more missteps than there are in this game because all of those things that you said there are true. Like, the game, it never outstays its welcome. And I mean that down to the point of no individual level that you have to go on even lasts that long.
No.
Like, it's all pretty much like, I'm going to dive in here, I'm going to clear this zone, I'm going to get back to the Bastion, I'm going to do my upgrades. And anyone who hasn't played it but heard you list out all, the 30 shrines and the blah blah blah.
Yeah, that also, I bet all that sounds complicated.
It's so not.
It's the simplest system in the world. Honestly, it's super straightforward.
Despite being like an RPG game at its core, you don't have to really engage with that stuff massively. You kind of create all those things through the simple act of finding the cores to put into the monument and like upgrading the Bastion itself. But other than that, you kind of don't have to do any of that stuff. You can do it. You can get really deep and granular on your upgrades and think really deep. I only really started doing that quite seriously towards the very end of the game when I thought, I better upgrade these weapons because these levels are getting harder. But up until that point, like, it's just a total blast to play because there's
that's
challenge.
The we've hardly even mentioned.
Yeah.
It's so fucking fun. It's incredibly fun to play.
The first, like, I don't even know, like 10 levels, just for talking sakes, like the first couple of hours of the game, the levels, I never found them especially difficult at all. But there's enough challenge there that you're not just coasting through it. Quite often in games like that, when there isn't too much challenge, you're just like, I just want to get through this. This is wasting my time a bit. It's just enough. And then the challenge starts to creep up and they start to introduce different enemy types. For instance, your use of the shield becomes significantly more important the later you go on in the game. You don't really need it all that much at the start. You can kind of just spam your way through it to a certain extent. But then you just have to start thinking a lot more about the enemies you're facing. All of that stuff comes together. And like I was originally kind of saying there, like I used pretty much the straightforward sword and bow. I was playing it almost like a Zelda game, basically. I was just thinking that was kind of what my approach to it all was.
I don't think that's a bad approach.
No, not at all. And just that alone, like I kind of cut out a lot of the wider options, all the RPG stuff, because I was like, I don't need to try out every gun and get good at them all. And there is all those proving grounds to go and improve your skills and get more XP. I was just like, with this sword and this bow, I'm having a laugh. And that's kind of all I need from this, I really enjoyed it because of that.
I think, Lewis, on these play-along games, we can easily be accused of suggesting that people play games that aren't very fun.
Yeah.
And that ask very wide existential questions like Kentucky Route Zero or Braid and things like this. Do you know what I mean? This is one of the purest video games I think I've ever come across in my life, and it is so goddamn fun. And the story is such a video gamey story.
Totally.
It's great. It has a nice little touching choice at the end. Did you save the guy Zolf who betrays you?
I did save Zolf, yeah.
I think everyone almost does in their first playthrough or such that I was reading, which was a really nice moment actually within the context of the game. But it's not something that I would want to massively discuss or even massively spoil for people, because it's just kind of not worth it. It's not worth the discussion around it because it is just a sort of video gamey story. But everything around that is just brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. I have a friend, a very good friend of mine, who is also a big gamer, who is into programming and does programming as a job. And he has told me on numerous occasions that Supergiant are one of his favourite developers because of how good they are at stuff like this. And it is, honest to God, the most honest video game I think I've ever come across in my life. It's so perfectly a video game. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's almost stereotypical.
Yeah, but again, like without overdoing it, I think, because that idea of like video games, like I was thinking about that even in relation to like Ghost of Tsushima. It has a lot of very video gamey elements to it. But the thing about Bastion is that it's just doing what it needs to do with those. It's simply setting up.
It's brilliant.
It's setting up a story world that means that things like the way that the ground comes up to meet you make sense, and the kinds of enemies and the kinds of worlds that you encounter make sense. But it's not trying too hard with any of that stuff, and it puts out an extraordinarily simple combat system.
Yeah.
But through simple variations of your long range weapon being a bow or it being
you
a
could
mortar
play that
fire,
game
you play it totally
10 times
and
have a completely different experience every single time for what is an incredibly simple concept. It's this thing of easy to learn and difficult to master, isn't it? That's what they're sort of doing. But also the game can be as difficult to master as you want it to be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to go into all these deep systems. You can quite easily play the game through with your hammer and bow, like the first two weapons that you get. Like, there's absolutely nothing stopping you. And to be honest with you, you're not putting yourself at any disadvantage not doing that.
No.
I just like the war machete and I like the musket, so I stuck with them. That was it.
That's it. And it's just like, later on in the game you encounter things like the fire bellows or the mortar gun, the kind of cannon thing, and that was exactly it for me as well. It was just like, these ones are also quite fun to use in a way that I didn't really find the shotgun particularly fun to use, so I dropped that as soon as I could do. But you get the ones later on and you think, well, this is going to just change how I'm playing it in these latter stages. I'm just going to approach these challenges.
See if I played it through again, see if I did a new game plus, I would choose two totally different ones,
exactly,
because it doesn't really matter what you choose.
No.
It's just choose the most fun ones for you and run with them. It's brilliant. And just before we finish, I have to mention the music is fucking brilliant.
Yeah, it's so catchy.
Absolutely incredible. Again, almost quite stereotypically video gaming music, but they fucking nailed it. Like, they've nailed absolutely every aspect of this game. It is incredible. I must admit, I wanted to play this game, and I have wanted to play this game for a long time. I didn't think I'd like it anywhere near as much as I did.
Yeah.
I really didn't. And even the first hour or so playing it, I thought, I'm not going to like this as much as I did. See, by the end of that game, I was thinking, am I going to play a new game plus of this, or am I going to start Ghost of Tsushima? That's
nice.
That was honestly what I was thinking.
Good stuff. I mean, yeah, like as I said earlier, like I didn't have any expectations particularly, and I've got to say, if you're the kind of person who, if you go away, if you've not played this yet and you go and Google it and you see the images or you watch a little video, it might not immediately appeal, and it certainly didn't for me. But see, when you've got hands on sticks with it, and particularly if you do kind of let the story breeze over you, don't get too concerned about any of that stuff and just play it like you used to play games when you were a kid, and you just go in and you just hit stuff.
Like, I'm not saying anything bad against the story either. Like, it's
fine. No, yeah,
it's a totally fine story.
Yeah,
it keeps moving, it keeps you invested in the world enough, but it's not the crux of what this game is about. I mean, a lot of these other games that we've done on play-alongs, the crux of it has been the narrative.
Absolutely,
you know what I mean? And that's been the most interesting thing about the game. That is not the case this time around. It is just unabashedly fun gaming.
Exactly that. And like, it's the kind of thing that on a new game plus you could play, you could play it with headphones on and listen to podcasts or listen to music or something. Like, you don't need any of that stuff. Like, the game itself is just so much fun to just be playing, you know?
Yeah. And even if you haven't played along with us, it is incredibly cheap on Steam and everywhere you can get it. It is totally worth however much money they're selling it for, quite frankly. It is totally worth it. And Lewis, our game for next month is going to be Transistor, also by Supergiant Games. Now, I again was sort of on the fence about this one in that I wasn't sure how much I was going to like it, but we were doing these kind of back-to-back games and we were exploring some of these like really top indie studios by doing a couple of games back-to-back, and I thought, well, we can put this one with Bastion, which I did want to play. I cannot wait to play this now. Like, I really can't. I'm really actively looking forward to playing this game next. I really can't wait.
Nice one. I mean, I feel exactly the same. I found myself quite late last night watching gameplay videos from it just to see how different it is to Bastion, and it is a little bit different. Like, I think it's got a more kind of tactical approach to combat than Bastion does, so I'm really interested just to see kind of what you were saying about your pal. Like, I trust that they're going to have done something interesting with this, like just based on
one game they've totally bought my trust. Like, they could make anything they want now and I'll be like, yep, I'm on board.
And in saying that, like, I've been reading wee bits and pieces about Hades recently for various reasons, and honestly, having played Bastion, I'm
Hades being the latest Supergiant game,
so there's
which
also
is
Pyre
isometric
roguelike.
Yeah. Roguelike's the bit that puts me off, though.
Well, that's it for me as well. But honestly, I'm really interested in Greek mythology and stuff anyway, and so the idea of Bastion style gameplay and just how successful they were there, honestly, I would check out anything that they're doing based on that one game, and I think that's fairly high praise indeed.
High praise indeed, Lewis. High praise indeed. But ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have to call it a day there. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerSToo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really does help us out. It helps us out so much. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It really does help us out. And it really does only take you 5 seconds. I know I say this every single week at the top of the show and at the end of the show, but it really, really does help us out. And if you could do that for us, we would really, really appreciate it. I'd like to remind everyone that our PlayAlong game will be Transistor for next month, which is also by Supergiant Games. And as I said before, I'm actually quite buzzing to start playing it. I'm really, really looking forward to it as well. Due to how big the last few games are that I've been playing, see, just having a wee indie title in there, particularly a super fun indie title in there to break that up, is so good. And I'm really, really looking forward to Transistor. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.